Hey everybody, thank you so much for playing along. I hope you're all doing well and getting ready for, let's say, productive but also restful, honestly, restful weekends when you get outside. In spite of the coming order, stay away from people, but get outside, be good to yourselves, do something pleasurable, honestly, it's important. Talk to somebody, come up with somebody to talk with. I already am missing classes, that's the truth, because it's nice talking with you all, even if we're not best friends. I have 3 jobs today. The first is to sum up stuff that you guys talked about in your comments, and this is gonna take a little longer this time because a couple of you said things that were so interesting that I'd like to answer a couple of the points that you made. And then the second is to look forward to what you have for Monday, which is a show and tell, and the third is to look forward to what you have for Wednesday, which is our first steps toward the Civil War. So what you did for today was super interesting. I thought most of you did a good job reading 2 of the 3 articles. Almost nobody talked about the second Stanton article. That's life. But I noticed that you essentially digested these articles quite well, these documents, noticing that the people advocating for women's suffrage were kind of appealing to all sorts of different notions in the air. So they were appealing to ideas about religion, they were appealing to ideas about politics, they were appealing to ideas about slavery, and most important, the question of independence. I found a few of you grappling with the notion of economic independence, which is super interesting. So that's fun. What I thought people could have done more of is think about why this is happening then and now. Women have lived under these strictures, or had lived under these strictures, for centuries in some cases. Things had changed, perhaps, in a lot of ways in the 19th century, but still, women didn't have political rights almost ever. Why are they starting to get them now? What is happening in America? So in a narrow way, why are they thinking about themselves as housewives? And why are they thinking about themselves as people who want to stop being defined as housewives? But in a broader way, what's going on in America? We had these conversations about the Declaration of Independence and how it was important, but somehow not always meaningful or hypocritical. Is it possible that these women have just imbibed what that says, and now what it means to be American is to think really hard about this stuff? I think it's possible. So I hope that you'll consider that possibility. The other question is, does any of this matter? It's always fun to look at women's rights advocates and say, yeah, these guys started everything and that's what got us here today. Well, boy, if they started everything, they did not succeed very quickly. It took them more than 70 years to get the vote after this, and it was still another 50 years after that before the women's movement started, which allowed for things like marital rape to stop being allowable by law, which allowed women to get credit cards without needing men's permission. So why did they fail? Did they fail? Is the 70-year timeline enough? Or is it possible to say so few of these people got the vote during their lifetimes that it's a failure? So consider that. What does that tell us about America too? It's important to recognize the strength of their movement, but it's also important to recognize the strength of their opponents. That is important. About slavery and the ties that slavery has to women's rights. That's so interesting. I'm going to read a question that one of your classmates really perceptively asked. Here's what she wrote. At this time, slavery was not abolished, correct? Did the men who were in slavery have more rights than women who were not? And could they partake in some kind of government decision-making? And why did these women compare their situation to slavery? So, in answer to the question, slavery was definitely not abolished. You are correct. That won't happen until the very end of this class. And enslaved men definitely did not have more rights than free women. Indeed, they also didn't have more rights than enslaved women. To be enslaved was practically to have no rights. That was part of what enslavement meant by this time. We've seen that indentured servitude, enslaved people could have some rights, give or take. At this point, essentially no. So it's really interesting that these women who did have at least some rights were comparing themselves to slaves who had none. So the other question is, why are they making this comparison? So let's be clear. The women who were arguing for their own women's rights were almost universally against slavery. The women's rights movement grew up in the abolition movement. These were almost all abolitionists, certainly all the people who gathered at Seneca Falls were, and they, as well as some abolitionist friends of theirs, saw commonalities between the struggles for slaves' freedoms and the struggle for women's rights. And they weren't wrong. Frederick Douglass, who we've met before, the great abolitionist, was at this convention and was a lifelong supporter of women's rights, including women's right to vote. But it's also true that by mixing the two, the white women abolitionists would sometimes make claims and choices that were, let's say, not totally great. Particularly Elizabeth Cady Stanton saying in the Declaration of Rights and Sentiments that she thought it was unfair that white women couldn't vote, while even, quote, ignorant and degraded men could vote. In fairness to her, she's not talking about enslaved people. She's talking about my people, the Irish. But people who weren't on her side about that probably could have read black people as being somehow ignorant or degraded too. So that's not exactly a blow for all of humanity. So it's complicated. I'm glad that some of you noticed it. I hope that all of you are thinking about it now. And I want you to continue thinking about what the push for freedom meant in America, because very rarely does the push for freedom mean the push for everyone's freedom. Frequently it means the push for my freedom, but maybe none of yours as well. Okay, what's coming up? Monday, you have a show and tell. You do not have reading to do if you're not choosing to do this show and tell. The show and tell stretches all the way from right after the Revolution, right after the Constitution, all the way up to the current moment in class, the stuff that you've read so far. So if you choose to do that show and tell, go look up a secondary source on a topic that's interesting to you and find a primary source that sticks in your craw, that bothers you, that makes you interested. Yeah, and then go compare those sources and see what your argument about the primary source is compared to what the scholar's argument about the secondary source is. Wednesday, the reading for Wednesday, things are heating up. All of the sources that you'll read for Wednesday are in one way or another about how slavery might or might not be allowed to expand from the southern states into the northern or the free states. So what did people think about this prospect? What did that mean to them? Did it for some people mean a kind of freedom for them? Or did it mean an expansion of slavery for everyone? And how did the potential spread of slavery affect what people thought America was or could be? So this was a longer one. I hope that I will keep most of them short, but you had interesting stuff to say about slavery, so I had to follow up on it. So anyway, thank you so much. I hope you have great weekends, and I will talk to you probably Wednesday. Great.